Have you been following, I'll say, the commercial space race? Is this new approach, do you think that that's just the future that we're going to be going into now, where the innovation will start to heavily come from private ventures as opposed to NASA or these government entities being the innovators?
I think almost certainly that is bound to happen. Look at what has happened most recently with the Boeing manufactured launch with the two astronauts that were stranded in space. And now there's a rescue mission that is going to be executed by SpaceX. That happened in April because of they've got a backlog of other launches behind that. But now SpaceX has agreed to go execute this rescue mission. And Boeing is in a very serious trouble right now, notwithstanding the economic problems, but then the strike. Boeing, as a consequence of these recent snafus, the most recent news that came out is they're looking at selling off their space business. They're going to sell off the space business. It's very difficult, and only very few companies, I believe, are only in the end going to end up succeeding and surviving. SpaceX certainly has the biggest lead, and then there's Blue Origin. At one point, I'd seen that there was like 300 startups in the space launch services sector. Not all of them will survive. Even some of the extremely well-funded startups in the space launch services sector. In fact, just yesterday the news came out. There are these companies that utilize almost exclusively 3D printing to build their rockets. Right. And they were extremely well-funded. They also did SPACs, I believe, and they raised hundreds of millions of dollars. Now they're at risk of shutting down. Virgin Orbit completely shut down. They went out of existence. So there's going to be lots of interesting dynamics that are going to play out in the space launch services sector. And there will most inevitably be consolidation. And the private companies have clearly shown that they're more efficient, they're quicker, they're more agile. And look at what SpaceX is going to be doing with the launch of Starlink satellites. The US government, the CIA, and other parts of the DoD have awarded major contracts to SpaceX for launching satellites. And these companies, these private companies, are going to utilize whatever advanced manufacturing techniques that they can get their hands on to be able to build these space vehicles. And the other critical thing that is going to allow them to succeed and work faster is vertical integration. SpaceX is highly vertically integrated. Everything is manufactured in-house.
Suman, can you break down vertical integration for our people listening at home?
There's a difference between a OEM and a vertically integrated OEM. An OEM, original equipment manufacturing company, will design something, and then they'll find a series of subcontractors and hand off contracts to these subcontractors to be able to make various parts and pieces or assemblies. Then maybe the final system integration gets done at the OEM site, where all these parts and pieces come together, and the OEM and their staff will put all the things together and do what's called final testing, assembly, and integration. And that brings in a lot of delays because specific subcontractors may not deliver on time, may fail, may not be able to produce and encounter other difficulties. Whereas in the vertically integrated OEM side, everything, all the manufacturing is done in-house. And what that allows you to do is collapse the supply chain. It allows you to control costs, and it allows you to do things in a much more connected and agile manner so that you can do your final system assembly and integration much faster. And that allows you to launch much quicker or to get to market much quicker. Right? Tesla is a highly vertically integrated automotive electric vehicle company. SpaceX is a highly vertically integrated company. I've been into SpaceX's facilities in Hawthorne, California, and they brought in just even to weld the sheet metal bodies of the rockets. They built their own friction stir welding equipment that can do a 20 or 30 foot long piece of sheet and do the seamless welding of that. They've done this, and they've even gone to the extent that they built their own foundry on site. They got so frustrated with the state of the art of the investment casting industry that Elon Musk took the executive decision to build a foundry. They actually built their own foundry. And so this is what vertical integration is all about. You have all the required manufacturing capabilities in-house, and you can then seamlessly integrate all of them and be able to be much faster than your competitors.
Right. So NASA.
Sorry, I might just...
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to finish with one comment. That
Yep.
is, it is our dream and vision to become a vertically integrated digital foundry. We want to be the world's first vertically integrated digital foundry where we have all of the processes in house, from the design of the actual component received from the design owner, the OEM, to all the steps that are required to be able to print the ceramic molds, to pour the metal, and to deliver the casting. And that way, we will have a vertically integrated digital foundry from design to final part, which will be 10 times faster, half the cost, and have 50% leaner square footage, floor footprint compared to a traditional foundry.
No, that's awesome. That's obviously going to be impactful. So I look forward to the future and seeing that come to fruition and come in quickly as it looks like it is. You talked about SpaceX and how the pain that Boeing's going through and how things have just developed. We also touched on private versus governmental prowess at this point in time. For some comparison, if you look at budgets, SpaceX their revenue for 2024 is $13 billion roughly. You can look at it more or less as from a budget perspective. I said revenue, but also if you look at NASA's budget, for example, that's 24 billion, right? That was from a quick search that I did earlier. So with that being said, you can see that SpaceX is actually doing numbers that is starting to be comparable to what type of numbers that a government entity would be doing that has essentially unlimited budget based off of a lever that they can pull in tax money, right? So that gives you an idea of how things are changing in the canvas of private industry is really going to be at the forefront of creating the future for us. Now, another thing to mention, you were talking about funding and things of that nature earlier. Y Combinator, which is one of the, if not the premier and the biggest and most well-known business incubator and accelerator, they actually have invested in 42 different aerospace or space type startups. Now, what that tells us is the smart money is going towards this space infrastructure and actually investing in hardware. As you mentioned earlier, it's way more complex to invest in, get something from a hardware perspective going versus software. So they're taking the hard route here because the value is so clear and that it's so obviously needed. Now we see that there's an entire ecosystem being stood up from that perspective there. Bringing it to your actual business, how do you see the next 5 years with respects to the change in what customer needs going to be? So we talked about federal, but you can talk more about federal if you really see that as the forefront and focus, or what I believe could be a great thing to mention is the commercial aspect. How do you see that evolving here in the future? And 5 years is pretty much the near future.
Yeah, there are some new emerging areas, white spaces, which are going to need advanced manufacturing and agile digital advanced manufacturing to support their needs. 5 or 6 traditional industry verticals where, let's say, a manufacturing technology like investment casting has been prevalent. If you now start thinking about some of the emerging areas where there is going to be a need for complex precision manufactured components that are emerging and that are actually getting deeply funded by venture capital and private equity, there's some tremendous white spaces, and I'm going to list a few here. So, for example, one new white space is compact nuclear reactors. There's a number of companies, like Commonwealth Fusion Systems is one of them. There's a bunch of others that have been pretty significantly funded by VCs with the hope of creating a compact nuclear reactor that can give the yield on the promise of ultra clean power. Now there's a new connection being made that the future data centers, which are going to do AI compute with hundreds of thousands of GPUs from NVIDIA and others, are going to consume so much incredible amounts of power that they might consume more power than entire countries put together. So you're going to need sources of power. You're going to need these compact nuclear reactors that can be plopped down on site close to like a data center owned by Google, for example. Google has signed up to have these delivered in 2030. Now, there are going to be needs, all kinds of physical infrastructural components that are going to be needed to be manufactured for these kinds of nuclear reactors, for example, compact nuclear reactors. Now, another example is we talked a little bit about space launch services. If you think about space launch, lightweighting is going to be a supremely important thing because you want to conserve on the fuel. You want to be able to take as much payload as you possibly can into space. So what you want to be able to do is lighten the overall weight of your vehicle itself. And the lightweighting is going to come about from generative AI. Generative AI is going to be able to create these very organic lightweighting designs. But now there is going to be a need for advanced manufacturing techniques that can actually create those very irregular, organic, lightweighted shapes. So there again comes the convergence of generative AI with additive manufacturing enabled advanced manufacturing to support space launch, where you can reduce the cost of space launch by lowering the weight of your vehicle, allowing more payload to be carried. Another white space that I think is going to be tremendous is electric aviation. Think about electric aviation being such a big new emerging sector. Just last week, electric taxis have been approved in India. And in the US, Joby Aviation has already got FAA certification. There are others that are chasing, coming very fast and getting FAA certification. Some military contracts, the Air Force has already awarded contracts to start delivering limited lots of these electric aircraft. So even there's going to be a need for advanced manufacturing techniques to rapidly produce small batches. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands. We're not talking about millions. We're not talking about tens of thousands. We're talking about hundreds to thousands. So there again, agile advanced manufacturing techniques are going to be needed to be able to make parts of that. So those three are important. Then now you can talk about, vehicle electrification in the future. The electric vehicle industry is going through a bit of a reset. But in the future, vehicle electrification, whether it's four-wheelers, whether it's two-wheelers, these are all going to need, again, agile advanced manufacturing techniques that can do batch production of precision components that are going to be needed for their operation. So I think I see these are some of the four emerging areas. And another one that I want to talk about is personalized medical implants, is where a digital scan like a CT or an MRI is taken of an individual patient, and utilizing that information, a custom fitting knee or a custom fitting hip or some other custom fitting prosthetic is produced for that patient that provides a perfect fit for that patient's gait, that patient's motion, body weight, and distribution. That's not being done today except for in a very limited amount. One company was doing it in the US. But if you look at the overall global worldwide population, how you could do this personalized implant to improve quality of life, that could be another huge one.